2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Don't Do That, the podcast where we talk about what not to do at work and beyond.
As equity practitioners, we found ourselves often thinking that folks should stop doing things before they start doing things. Hence the title of our podcast, Don't Do That. I'm Anee. I'm an equity coach, organizational equity strategist, and educator with a deep curiosity for how to improve systems and a commitment to lift others as I continue to learn and grow.
I'm Karen, and I've worked in social justice for over a decade. I'm a consultant, coach, and thought partner. My purpose is to make community matter. I do that by helping leaders create better work environments. Anee and I met as consultants and quickly became friends. Collectively, we have over 25 years of experience navigating equity, inclusion, and justice in the workplace. Don't Do That is a platform to tell stories about making mistakes at work and how to fix them. The views on this podcast are our own. We do not speak on behalf of our organizations or the communities we mention. Welcome, listeners. Today on Don't Do That, we are discussing return to office mandates. Now, returning to the office may seem like a good idea in theory, but these mandates can negatively impact employees' well-being and satisfaction. So we're getting into that and much more today. Before we get started, Anee, I thought that it would be fun to have some listener feedback. We are on episode 4, so we have been hearing folks' reaction to the launch of the show, and it's been a joy to hear how some folks are receiving our work in the podcast. So one listener shared this after the We've Always Done It This Way session, and so I thought it would be fun to share.
Okay.
This listener said, "First of all, ambrosia salad was not on my bingo card for today's podcast. Second, Karen says Black people don't eat from just anyone's kitchen in reference to work potlucks. And at first I thought, I don't eat from just anyone's kitchen either. But then when I reflected on it, I think maybe I did." So,
First of all, shout out to the listener because I had no idea that that's what that was called, ambrosia salad. I was just like the thing that had all the layers and the things. So
yeah, I thought we're out here saving lives.
yes, yes,
Saving people from eating in everyone's kitchen.
yes,
So,
it's a best practice.
so thank you, listener, for that feedback. We invite you to keep them coming. You can email us at the don't do that pod at gmail.com or reach out to us on LinkedIn. We love to hear your comments and reactions.
For sure.
So getting back into our topic for today, return to the office, I wanted to start with taking a bit of overview of the landscape like we do. So we know that many companies like Dell and Amazon have issued these full-time return to the office mandates. And now we also know that federal workers are returning to the office full-time as well. And often when these mandates come out, we see that folks talk about greater collaboration and connection as the primary reason for folks to get back into the office 5 days a week. But I think there's more to consider before we bring everybody back to the office full time. And actually, a study by Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh suggests that office mandates make no difference in a company's financial performance, and they can make workers less satisfied with their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Another report published by Human Capital Development Lab at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, which was in partnership with Great Place to Work, showed overall well-being has slightly declined since its peak in 2020. And the report showed gaps in workplace well-being by demographic. So white, male, and older employees are faring better than Black, female, and younger employees. So, return to the office. Let's get into it, Anee.
Yeah.
What do you think are the pros and cons of returning to the office full time?
Okay. So I will start by saying these are my pros and cons. I think the point of this conversation is there is clearly no one size fits all. I think when we try to create containers to hold all of us in our unique spaces, our unique life context, and all those things is like where we get into, the challenges. So that's the asterisk here of like, here are my personal pros and cons. So I think one for employers to consider as a pro for return to office, it's going to be super practical. And that is, in some ways, there is a leveler playing field when it comes to the work environment, right? When we think about what work from home means, it's typically people who are in their physical home and having to work. Some people have co-working spaces, some people are able to go to like third spaces, libraries, whatever, but most folks are working in their home. Not everyone's
Mhm.
home is the same. Not everyone has a private office. Not everyone has like workspace and workspace material that looks the same. So in a physical office, you can create more equity around the physical working environment, provide high speed internet. It should be this way, right? You should provide high speed internet,
Hopefully.
similar resources for folks. So that is one pro. I will say one con is, of course, the flexibility. And I'm not even going to talk about like the flexibility in sort of the abilities to sort of flex in and out of work and manage other things. I'm going to talk about the commute.
Hmm.
That for many people, the cost of the commute, the time of the commute, the time lost in working for the commute, the what it does to your spirit and the commute.
Okay.
I think that is a whole thing that folks are not even considering, especially in a season. I think it just speaks to the interconnectedness of workplaces. Like if they're not also working with local, municipalities to think about how are we supporting, infrastructure around public transportation, parking options, cost of transportation, all of that. I think that is something that is certainly a con.
I I agree with a lot of that. I think that the pros of going back to the office full time are like those water cooler moments that we talk a lot about, which are those moments you get to chat with someone that is technically offline, which can also be a little bit more efficient if you need to grab someone to ask a quick question, wrap up a next step from a project instead of having to like look at somebody's calendar and schedule a meeting. You can grab them when you see them. I would say that the cons of returning to the office, much of what you named, is one, the increased costs from transportation to food to family care, where you may have had to take care of those things 2 days a week. Now you're increasing that to five. And that's an added cost when wages are not changing when we're returning to the office now. I think the other con is also around how returning to the office full time centers work again as the primary focus of our lives. Whereas during the pandemic, I think we all got an opportunity to decenter work in
Mm,
a way that we hadn't before, where work became a piece of our life, but not necessarily the whole thing, right? We didn't necessarily have to live to work in the same way that we did prior to the pandemic. And so I do feel like these full time return to office mandates are aiming to take us back and doesn't take into account the ways that folks can stay well, to your point, in having work be more of a container than
mhm.
it was in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think I want to better understand the mandates. I feel like there's something for me, there has to be something missing from that conversation, right? If we think about like, you know, how we see the benefits to it, I am hoping, I am imagining that there is additional context. I imagine folks are thinking about um the costs of, real estate, of like folks who are in long-term leases. I think about the ways in which we understand work across generations as well. The level of relationship folks have with technology, the level of trust there is among an organization. You talked a little bit about sort of how people are managing or policing behavior of staff. I think in organizations that
Can we
there's a
that
deep
part?
level of trust, that can look different. I think it's hard if you have like a, multinational organization with, you know, tens of thousands of employees for it to be like a deep level of trust there. I get that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, double tapping on that policing people's behavior piece in terms of just office culture. I think when folks are back in the office, the folks that are looking to see what you're doing over here, what you're not doing over here, which I think also lends to like the performance of being busy or the performance of being productive, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
which, is not always true and also has no bearing on how well someone does their job or not. And so I think that returning to the office also brings another layer of looking at other people's activities when you can mind your business and and mind your role
Yes. I
in
think
the way that you're supposed to.
another way to say that is there is no evidence that that is tied to like outcome or performance or any sort of like metric of success. So like I mean, I would say that's also dependent on like the business, right? So I think there are some businesses that maybe employee activity is directly tied to like outcome. I could see that in like maybe something like medical coders or something like that, like where they have like a productivity level based on like just activity. But in many businesses, that is not the case. And I would even offer in that business, like people are going to work so hard as they can, as hard as they can or desire to, regardless of where they're at. I don't know that people who come into an office are going to feel more or less compelled to get through their production for the day. I think what we know and what you shared in the context is like when people feel better, they work better. So,
Yeah. I do want to talk a little bit about like work pre-pandemic and work post-pandemic because I think that is a collective marker for a lot of us in terms of how our relationship to work has changed. And so, from your perspective, how did your relationship to work change after the pandemic? And do you think these full-time return to office mandates aligns with the way you've evolved your relationship to work?
that's a tough question for me to answer because, and I think my situation is probably similar to a lot of people. Like my life definitely completely changed during the pandemic. Like I had kids. So pre pandemic, I was not a working mother, but post pandemic, I am a working mother.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to know if I was not a working mother, if I would be like, I'm all on board for coming in the office. Like, I love, a good work outfit and like connecting with people, or this is how I could talk to people, or if I would still be, desiring the flexibility. So it's hard to say that the sort of like the catalyst would be just the pandemic itself.
Mm-hmm.
What feels most salient to me is that what we found out in the pandemic was what was possible, right? What we know is possible is we can have a completely remote workforce and still achieve work outcomes. We know that is possible. So I think it's a hard sell when people are saying, like, this is about productivity, because that doesn't feel like it tracks with what the data shows.
Yeah.
I think it is certainly about something else. I don't know what that thing is, but I don't think it's I think the pandemic showed us what clearly is possible.
Yeah. I agree. I think for me, and thinking about my relationship to work, I don't know what it is in terms of energy level pre pandemic and post pandemic, but I I don't have it in the same way that I did prior to the pandemic in terms of showing up in the office 5 days a week. Like,
Yeah.
just the sheer energy that it takes to do that is it hits different than it did, I have to say. And to your point of, like, showing what's possible, I think for me, it definitely showed that I can have a flow in working from home that is as productive as being in the office, and sometimes more so. I know that sometimes going to the office for me, especially when I have like focused work to do, is difficult to accomplish because one of the things I think is also missing from this conversation is the way that we design our physical workspaces. And I think that as folks have issued these full time mandates, it hasn't been coupled with how do we redesign our physical office space to accommodate for the ways that people work and to be more accessible. And
Yeah.
it's like, how do you have a space for folks that make it overstimulated by the open office environment or need, something different in terms of how they need to work? How do you ensure that technology is able to meet those meeting norms, whether someone is in person or hybrid? And I don't think that I've seen that part of the conversation talked about when we see these return to office mandates, especially as it relates to being in the office full time.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Earlier I talked about like a pro is generally the in-person workspace can be more equitable, but I think it's actually not. I think it's more the same, right? It might be equal, but it's certainly not equitable. So thinking about like folks who are part of the disability community, like do we have spaces there? And I distinctly remember during the pandemic when everyone was remote, hearing from folks in the disability community saying like, this is great. Now I don't feel like I have to, ask for an accommodation. I'm just like a square in a virtual room. And it's like, I have the technology I need to feel like I'm an equal player in the conversation. No one's asking me to like stand up to be heard, or if I have challenges with like seeing, I don't have to be, moving up in a room. I think for sure that's a great call out that we're not evolving our physical workspaces in ways that feel transformative or fully inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to move us into our do that and don't do that segment where we name some things and each of us take turns in naming if that's something we should do or don't do.
Okay.
So I will start in the spirit of returning to the office full time.
Yes.
You tell me, Ani, if this is a do that or don't do that. Using sick time to avoid going to the office when you need to be at home.
Um, do that. I think you should use all your time. I don't know if this is like the right thing to say, but I think you should use all of your time if it's available to you and you're not feeling well enough to go to the office. That's how I understood that. You don't feel well enough to go to the office. That's an appropriate use of your sick leave. So, yeah, I say do that.
Okay, do that.
What do
I think for me, I would generally agree on using your sick time or leave time, however you please.
Mhm.
I do think that one of the things that I feel like has been a benefit post pandemic, to your point earlier around what's possible, is having the flexibility to attend to the unexpected and
Mhm.
still being able to fit work into that. And so I do feel like it would be great for more employers if they do have this return to office mandate to offer additional flex time for those unexpected moments.
Yes, yes, and I think so many people don't do that. So many people, if they're feeling sick, what they will do is choose to work from home. And actually, they should just be sick,
Mm,
take off
hmm
work. I hope that's what people are doing. So,
Yes, use your sick time, y'all.
yes.
Okay.
Okay. I have a fun do that or don't do that
Okay.
for you. And thinking about our hybrid workplaces. Um, Should we have um, dress codes for hybrid workplaces? Do that or don't do that. And you know what I'm asking?
That's a good one. I'm going to say do that, particularly if you have a camera on culture. I think that some folks don't have camera on cultures, which in which case you can look however you want.
Yeah,
Although I would always be ready to prepare for the unexpected in case somebody tells you to turn that camera on.
sure.
But I do think it is important to present yourself in a way, one that makes you feel confident showing up to work, um, and makes you feel like the professional that you want to be, and to generally maintain a culture that everyone is showing up as their best selves. Like, I'm not going to be the girl that will show up in like workout clothes necessarily, or my bonnet, or anything like that. Like, that is a space for my home,
Yeah.
not a space for my virtual work environment.
Yes. And I ask that because I think that's a part of the like feedback there is like the hybrid space or the remote workers are just unprofessionalized, that is just like too casual, and people are, using the bathroom and taking Zoom calls, or like, in Target and hopping on the phone or whatever they're doing. So, yeah, I agree. I think there should be some standards around that.
That's a standard dress code on virtual spaces. Okay. My do that or don't do that is offering food and transportation benefits to subsidize the cost of going into the office 5 days a week. Do that or don't do that.
Food and transportation. The interesting thing is some companies do that. Like many larger companies, like I know Google at their campus, they had like shuttle services that they had provided people in the Bay Area. They have a whole cafeteria. So they have been doing this. So this is not new. I would offer as much as a company can afford to provide their employees, like the better for sure. I think the trickiness comes in with different types of organizations. So I think about like um, nonprofits. I think it'd be hard to get a funder to support like gas mileage in
A food program for the
part of the
nonprofit?
admin costs. It's like, okay, the salaries and benefits are enough, but like here we are, we need extra for like lunches for the administrators of these funds. And then I think which is a whole nother conversation about philanthropy and how it's organized. And then even like
Mm-hmm.
consultants is like, okay, am I billing the client for, gas mileage to come into the office to work? So I think it could be tricky. Generally, as much as you can offer, the better. So I'm on board.
I'm on board with it too, especially as we have gotten into a high inflationary environment. It's like eggs are high, groceries are high. Like,
You're speaking
the,
on behalf of the people.
the people need relief.
Yeah.
So if we can give it to them and by means of our employers,
Yeah.
I'm all for it. If it
Yes.
if
I
it can
mean,
happen, I'm here for it.
this is trickle down economics. I don't know that works. I think relief, the people do need relief. They come from businesses. It's a whole nother can of worms for sure. But yeah, people need relief. Okay. So do that or don't do that. Have employees track their time.
Oh. Um, so I'm gonna give an asterisk to say it depends.
Okay.
I think where it is critical for your business in terms of like you have to bill according to time, or something like that, then yes, have folks track their time. I'm not necessarily a proponent of like tracking people's time as a covert way of trying to see what folks are doing. I do feel like I love the value of treating people as adults and believing that they will conduct themselves as such. And if it becomes, an issue, then I think there are other ways to address those things in terms of like performance review processes, which are outside of tracking time necessarily.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lazy way of avoiding conversations with your employees. I think if you're in regular communication with the folks that you're managing, your team, everyone should be communicating status of their work, just as a best practice for us being successful in our work. So I think the tracking time is like a lazy way of getting at that. So
So for you to don't do that.
don't do that unless to your point, there's a business need. So
Okay. Okay. Well, let's move into our wrap up and key takeaways. So, what would you say are your final thoughts around return to office mandates?
my final thoughts are make it make sense for your business, your work, your people. I think a theme that I constantly come to is we should constantly be evolving. I think when we lean on tradition, it tends to not be uh, a space that is fair and equitable for like folks who have historically been left out, right? So if we say, oh, we want to continue to do it how we always have, like how we always have has not been fair for everyone. And I think if we're thinking about just how we accommodate our new workforce, technology, leveraging, just opportunity to grow and evolve, we should constantly be thinking about how to do that. It shouldn't take like a global crisis to sort of push us towards that. I think businesses should always be thinking about what is a better new way to work and not thinking, how can we do things an older way? In no other context are businesses thinking like that. So,
Yeah, we're not going back.
no. We're never talking about going back unless it's like this. So like let's just be consistent here and think about evolving and moving forward. It doesn't have to be like hybrid. It doesn't, we can think about what that looks like, but we should be thinking about evolving.
Yeah, I agree. My takeaway is very similar in that I think it's important for folks to prioritize flexibility and well-being in any office mandate because I think that is also how you will get the most from your talent.
Mhm.
And so I think it's important to be intentional about how employees can return to the office with ease, and thinking about, what does your organization or company demand and how can we be intentional about our flex time, about expanding benefits, about office redesigns so that folks can come back to work with ease and expect. And to your point, I think it's time for us to accept that our old ways of working have ended. And so with that, we need to constantly be looking around and for evolution.
Yeah. Love that.
Love that. Well, thanks for today's conversation, Ani. We can wrap up here. And just as a reminder for our listeners, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we ask that you actually leave a review of our podcast. It helps to boost engagement. If you'd like to reach out to Ani or I, please be sure to email us at the don't do that pod@gmail.com. And be sure to share this podcast with a peer or colleague that you think would be interested. And until next time, remember,
Don't
don't
do
do that.